thought we would depart from the regular Seder and perhaps discuss a little bit Haggadah. Over the years we've done so. We usually start from the beginning. So this year we'll start from the end, and perhaps we'll cover some new ground. The end of the Maggid section begins as follows. If a person doesn't explain the following three things, he does not fulfill his obligation. These are they: Pesach, Matzah, Umar. What obligation are we speaking of? What obligation do you not fulfill if you don't explain the meaning of the Pesach, Matzah, and Umar? The Ramban in Maseches Brachos seems to understand that we're talking about the mitzvah of Achilas Korban Pesach. That a person does not fulfill the obligation of eating the Korban Pesach unless he explains the meaning of the Korban Pesach. And likewise, he doesn't fulfill the mitzvah of matzah and mar, eating matzah and mar, unless he explains their meaning. And this is in contrast to other mitzvahs. Other mitzvahs, you do the mitzvah as long as you have in mind that you're doing it for the sake of the mitzvah. A person is yotzei. But when it comes to these three, Pesach, Matzah, and Mar, you only fulfill the mitzvah of eating them if you explain their meaning. And therefore the Ramban goes out of his way to explain, but don't make a mistake and think that if you didn't explain them, you have to eat them over again. Because this that he says, Lo yotzi de chavaso, is not to be taken literally. It means he wasn't yotzei mitzvah min ha-muvchar. He wasn't yotzei in the optimal way. But certainly we wouldn't say b'di'eved that if he already ate the Korban Pesach, he has to eat it again. Or if he ate Matzah Mar, he has to eat it again. But it's clear from the fact that the Ramban has to give this disclaimer that the Ramban understood that the obligation you do not fulfill is the mitzvah of eating the Pesach, Matzah, Mar. And the Ramban says it doesn't mean you don't fulfill it entirely, it means you don't fulfill it in the most preferable way. There's a tshuva from the Binyan Siyan. And the Binyan Siyan says that Lulei, if not for the Ramban, he would say a different pshat. That the mitzvah you don't fulfill is the mitzvah of Sipur Yitzias Mitzrayim. Because if you look at all the various psukim that talk about the mitzvah of Sipur Yitzias Mitzrayim, they all seem to be responses to the questions of the children as to the meaning of the mitzvahs. Now the child asks, Mo ha'avoida hazayis lochem. What is the meaning of this avoda? You have to do it. Or the Chacham asks, the Tom asks, Mazois. Or the Chacham asks, Moha Edai Sachukim Bamishpatim Asher Tziva Hashem Elo Keinu Eschem. Because all the responses, the entire Sipur is always described as a response to the question as to the meaning of the mitzvahs. And therefore, Mugil says that that's the minimal obligation. If you don't explain the meaning of the symbols, you can tell as many midrashim about the Eser Makkos and the Kriyas Yamsuf, you haven't fulfilled the obligation, because this is how the Torah expresses the idea. And therefore the Binyan Siyan says that now we don't have to say, as the Ramban says, that Lo yotzi yidei chayvasu is not to be taken literally. Because it's very reasonable to say that as far as the mitzvah of Sipur Yitzias Mitzrayim, this is a requirement which is makiv. This is a requirement which is absolutely necessary. And the Binyan Siyan goes on to explain that there are some very interesting nafkaminas, some very interesting differences between whether we understand the mitzvah we're discussing is the mitzvah of eating the Korban Pesach, or whether it's the mitzvah of Sipur Yitzias Mitzrayim. For example, Pesach Sheni. The people that didn't bring Korban Pesach in Nisan, who make it up in Chodesh Iyar, do they have to explain the symbols? So if we understand as the Ramban that the mitzvah in question is the mitzvah of Achilas Korban Pesach, so if you eat the Korban Pesach in Chodesh Iyar, because you're bringing Pesach Sheni, you'd also have to explain the meaning of the Pesach Matzah Umar. On the other hand, if we're talking about the mitzvah of Sipur Yitzias Mitzrayim, we don't find there's a mitzvah of Sipur Yitzias Mitzrayim in Chodesh Iyar. Pesach Sheni doesn't necessitate Sipur Yitzias Mitzrayim. So therefore, as well, it wouldn't be necessary to explain the symbols on Pesach Sheni. This would be an afternoon. It's very interesting that the Binyan Siyan wrote that tshuva on Pesach Sheni, and was discussing the issue because it was something that was relevant to that particular day. So we have two interpretations. Pesach shayu oichlem shayu avosenu oichlem bezman shebeis hamikdash kayim. The Pesach which our forefathers ate when the Beis Hamikdash stood, al shummo, What did it represent? So the answer which is given is Al Shum Shepasach HaKadosh Baruch Hu Al Batei Avasein of Mitzrayim. Now the word Pesach, interestingly, has two interpretations. Rashi in Chumash brings two interpretations. One interpretation is that it means to have compassion. And the other interpretation is the generally accepted one, that it means to jump over, to pass over. I guess if we went like the other pshat in Rashi, the holiday wouldn't be called Passover. It would be called Mercy or something like that. So apparently the second interpretation is the one which is generally assumed to be correct. But Rashi brings two interpretations. So the Korban Pesach is because the Kadosh Baruch Hu passed over the Jewish homes. Shenemar, as it says, "V'amartem zevach Pesach ul Hashem," you shall say that it is a Pesach offering to God. Asher Pasach, for he passed over al batei b'nei Yisrael b'Mitzrayim, the Jewish homes in Mitzrayim, b'nag poes Mitzrayim, when he smote Mitzrayim, v'espotenu hitzil, and he saved the Jewish homes. And when Moshe Rabbeinu told this to the Jewish people, this was before the Korban Pesach was brought the first time. Moshe was telling them that you should know that when the 14th of Nisan comes, you're going to slaughter the Korban Pesach, and this will become an annual observance, and your children are going to come to you and say, Moha avoda zos lochem, and you're going to tell them that it is a Zevach Pesach because God passed over our homes. And when the people heard this good news, it was like a triple header. First, that they would be redeemed, and secondly, that they would come to Eretz Yisrael, because that's what Moshe said, that when you come to Eretz Yisrael, your children will ask this question. And thirdly, that they would have children, which is an amazing thing, because you would think that these people who were slaves in Mitzrayim had no dreams of being able to raise another generation. So they bowed in gratitude to HaKadosh Baruch Hu upon hearing the good news. Now, the Mefarshim ask a very basic question over here, which is, it seems that the Torah is telling us the significance of Korban Pesach is to commemorate the tremendous miracle that God passed over the Jewish homes. What kind of miracle is that? If HaKadosh Baruch Hu chooses to smite the Egyptian tormentors, was there any danger? Were the Jewish victims somehow at risk? Like it's a miraculous thing that the Jews were spared? As you have the tormentors and the victims. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu chooses to punish the tormentors. So there'd be a risk that the victims should be killed as well? To the extent that you say that the Jews being spared from the Makas B'choros was a miracle worth commemorating on an annual basis? Seems very, very strange. And it's not only difficult from this pasuk. The fact is that all the mitzvahs that relate to B'chor in the Torah, the B'chor of a Behemah Tahira, the B'chor of a Behemah Tmeya, Pidyon Haben, all the mitzvahs that relate to B'chor relate to this idea that HaKadosh Baruch Hu spared the B'chorim of the Bnei Yisrael, and that's why we have these observances. What's the big deal? What is the miracle that HaKadosh Baruch Hu spared the Jewish B'chorim in the Makas B'choros? If HaKadosh Baruch Hu chooses to punish the Egyptians, the Jews for some reason are at risk. Furthermore, the Makas B'choros was only one of 10 plagues. And l'chora, we should assume that the Jews were not affected by the first 9 either. So why is there no big deal about that? That the Jews were spared from the Dam, the Tzvardeya, the Kingdom, the Arv, the Dever, the Shchin. Why don't we celebrate that? It's only the Makas B'choros that will make a big deal that the Jews were spared of the Makas B'choros. And these are the questions that the Mefarshim raise. There's another question which to me seems so obvious, but I never saw any of the Mefarshim bring it up. That the paragraph doesn't really explain what the significance of the particulars of the Korban Pesach is. It all relates to the name. Since HaKadosh Baruch Hu was Pesach, so we bring a Korban Pesach. Well, any ritual, call it Pesach, and it relates to the idea that Hashem was Pesach. There's no explanation here as to the significance of a sheep, slaughtering a sheep, eating a sheep, bringing a sacrifice. It says that the significance of Pesach is al shum shel Pesach. So okay, any ritual. Eat a carrot and call it the Pesach carrot. Shay, Pesach. Al shum shel Pesach. Or do a dance or sing a song and call it Pesach, and it relates to al shem shel Pesach. The paragraph doesn't explain why this particular ritual of bringing a sheep, slaughtering a sheep, corresponds to the idea of Pesach. And the Rabbi Eliezer addresses this in his commentary, and he says that to understand this you have to lay down certain hagdamas, certain introductory principles. Number one, he says, and this is something that may be hard for us to buy into, but it certainly was a prevalent belief, certainly at that time, that the deity controls the world through the agency of mazalais, through the agency of constellations. Now, the constellations, the stars, and the various arrangements, these are the tools through which God manipulates the lower world. So objects in the lower world are connected to the stars and the constellations in the celestial realm. One of those constellations was, of course, the Mazel Kle. We would call it Aries the Ram, which is the Mazel of Chodesh Nisan. And this was considered, says the Barbanel, the Bukhar. It was the premier, the firstborn, so to speak, of all the mazoles, of all the constellations. And the Egyptian nation had a special connection to this mazel. I guess the Egyptians saw themselves as first and foremost in the ancient world, and therefore they were especially bound to this mazel, which is the Bukhar of our mazalos, and especially the Bukharim of Mitzrayim. You know, the firstborn of, I guess, the firstborn empire considered themselves especially attached to the Mazel Kle, and that their kayach, their entire strength, came from the Mazel. Now, if as rational people you find this hard to swallow, let me bring it down to earth in a way that may have a certain poignance. The Chayvus HaLevavos says a very important yesod. He says that, let's say a person places his trust in something or someone other than the Ribono Shel Olam. He places his trust in money, he places his trust in his intelligence, his talent, etc. So the punishment is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives him over to that thing in which he placed his trust. The HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't throw the book at him, doesn't just obliterate him right off the bat. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, listen, this is what you want, this is the way it'll be. You will be nimsar, you will be given over to that thing. So let's say a person places his trust in money. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, it's fine. So we'll give you an opportunity to try it out. You'll be dependent on your money. Well, that doesn't mean certain failure. For a while, a person can manage relying on money. After a longer period of time, the law of averages will catch up with him. Sooner or later, he'll make some bad investment decisions. He may lose the money, and then he'll be, as the saying goes, in gehakt tzaras, because he placed his trust in money. Now there is no money. And it could be, if a person relies on his power of persuasion, it could be the same thing. And it's for a while you can keep it up, but sooner or later you'll end up saying the wrong thing, and you'll offend the person that you mean to ingratiate yourself to, and then you'll be finished. But that's the cloud. Whatever you place your trust in, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says you are given over to that. So likewise it could be that when people believed in the mazalais, HaKadosh Baruch Hu humored them. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, okay, I will invest the mazalais with certain koyachais, with certain powers, since this is what you believe, and we'll see how long it lasts. And of course, sooner or later, the mazalais would invariably let them down. But this is the idea, that Mitzrayim believed in the mazalais, because the Mazel Kle was the first of the mazalais, and the Egyptians saw themselves as the first nation, and the Bukharim especially so. Another Hakdama he lays on is the idea that the Jews in Mitzrayim, for the most part, also shared the values of the Egyptians. We've talked about this many times over the years, the idea that the Jews were ethnically Jewish, that they kept their Jewish names and Jewish clothing and Jewish language, group identity, they didn't slander one another. But on the other hand, when it came to religious values, they pretty much assimilated. Chazal say they were Mevatel Bris Milah, and Chazal tell us in several places that they even succumbed to the temptation of Avodah Zarah, to the extent that at Yam Suf, when HaKadosh Baruch Hu was going to make a miracle to drown the Egyptians and save the Jews, the Malachim had a grievance. The Malachim said, what are you doing? They said, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Halolo of the Avodah Zarah, Halolo of the Avodah Zarah. These are idolaters and these are idolaters. There's no point in drowning the Egyptians and saving the Jews. They're no better than the others. So this is another important Haggadah, that if the Egyptians were devotees of the Mazel Kleh, the Jews were, for the most part, as well. And finally, the last introduction the Rabbanel proposes is that when HaKadosh Baruch Hu sends a makkah directly, not through the agency of a medium, then it is sent with pinpoint accuracy. So if HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants to zero in on a target, even in the middle of a big crowd, HaKadosh Baruch Hu can get that person alone. Nobody around him will be affected. But when HaKadosh Baruch Hu conducts the world through natural means, so to speak, through a natural medium, then it may be that innocent bystanders also are affected to the extent that they also are subject to the influence of that medium. It says the Rabbanel as follows, that the first 9 makkahs, these were phenomena that HaKadosh Baruch Hu directed b'chvodo v'atzmo himself, and therefore the fact that the Egyptians were afflicted and the Jews were spared is not miraculous at all. If HaKadosh Baruch Hu sent the makkahs in the first place to afflict the Jews, and the Egyptians, and only the Egyptians, so of course the Jews are going to be spared. The Makkah's B'chairis was different, because the Makkah's B'chairis really was a test and a demonstration. It was a demonstration, it was the undermining of the belief system of Mitzrayim. It wasn't just a makkah, a plague, a punishment, a source of suffering. It was a demonstration that the entire belief system of Mitzrayim was bankrupt. The belief in the Mazel Kleh was false. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu demonstrated that by cutting off the power, cutting off the electricity, so to speak, that flowed through the Mazel Kleh to the Egyptian nation. And therefore, if the influence of the Mazel was cut off, this would affect not only the Egyptians, it would affect everyone who placed their trust in the Mazel Kleh, would be equally afflicted. And to the extent that we explained that the Jews also were complicit in this, the Jewish B'chairis also should have died in the Makkah's B'chairis. So what HaKadosh Baruch Hu did is provided the Jewish people an opportunity to reject entirely the belief in the Mazel Kleh. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu told them, take the earthly sheep, which is the representation of the celestial Kleh, slaughter it, roast it, eat it, and that shows that you have totally rejected the value system of the Mazel Kleh. And in the merit of that, you'll be spared. Because again, who is afflicted? Those who place their trust in the Mazel Kleh. But if you show that you believe it's nonsense and you totally reject it, then you're not subject to its influence anymore. And that's why here the Bnei Yisrael had to do something. The other 9 makkahs, it wasn't necessary for the Jews to do something to protect themselves. If HaKadosh Baruch Hu sent the makkah in the first place to the Egyptians, of course the Jews are going to be spared. But here, the very nature of the makkah was such that the hashpah, the influence of the Mazel Kleh was being cut off, that would have affected anyone who was devoted. Here the Jews had to stand and demonstrate that we repudiate the entire Kleh ideology, and it was in the merit of that the Jews were spared. And that's why it's a big deal. It's taka miraculous. And that's why the PESACH, the God passing over, and the compassion was directly related to this observance specifically. It wouldn't have been good enough to eat a carrot and call it the Pesach carrot, or to do a dance and call it the Pesach dance. It's not the name. It's the kleh, it's the nature of this very sacrifice, which was the schus that caused the HaKadosh Baruch Hu to have compassion and jump over the Jewish homes. The matzah that we eat, al shumma. Why do we eat this? Al shum shlo hispit b'tzeikim shlavasenu lahachmitz. Our forefathers' dough did not have time to ferment. Before God revealed himself to the Jewish people and liberated them. So it seems that the Jews had made dough and they were waiting it for it to rise, and they had no time to wait, because the HaKadosh Baruch Hu revealed himself, and it was time to leave Mitzrayim. Shenamar, it says in the Pasuk, Vayofu es habatzek asher hotziim Mitzrayim ugos matzos, that the dough which they took from Mitzrayim, they baked into matzos. This was at the first station, the first stop after the Yetzias Mitzrayim. The departure point from Mitzrayim was a city called Ramses. And the first stop outside of Mitzrayim was a place called Sukkos. And it says that they took the dough with them from Ramses, and they brought it to Sukkos. When they arrived at Sukkos, they baked it there as matzos. Kilo chametz, it was not fermented. Ki gorshim Mitzrayim, they were chased out of Mitzrayim. Lo yochel listameh, they couldn't tarry. The gam seidel lo asul, and furthermore, they didn't even prepare other provisions. So this is what the pasuk says. So anybody reading this paragraph is struck by an apparent contradiction. The narrator says that the reason that they could not wait for the dough to ferment is because HaKadosh Baruch Hu revealed himself. It was Nigla Aleim Melach Malchem Lochem. The Rebbeinu Shalom revealed himself and redeemed them. Told them, time to go. And the pasuk says the reason they didn't have time to wait is because the Egyptians chased them out. So which was it? Seems to be a contradiction. The narrator says one thing and the pasuk says something else. And the Netziv, in his Perush Chumash, points out an interesting thing. That in this pasuk there's an apparent redundancy. It says, Ki garshu b'Mitzrayim, they were chased out of Mitzrayim, v'lo yachlu l'svameya, they couldn't wait. And that's redundant. It would have been enough to say, Ki garshu b'Mitzrayim, they were chased out of Mitzrayim. We understand that means they couldn't wait. So the Netziv understands that the pasuk means two things. There were two reasons. First of all, they were chased out of Mitzrayim. But even without that, they couldn't wait. Why couldn't they wait? So the Netziv gives a different explanation why they couldn't wait. But apparently the author of the Haggadah understands they couldn't wait because the Shekhinah revealed itself and told the Jews it's time to leave. So on the one hand, yes, they were chased by the Egyptians, but on the other hand, even had they not been chased, they would have been drawn after the Shekhinah, and they would have gone out, and therefore they couldn't wait. The Mefarshim and the Haggadah raise a very, very serious question. Number one, they point out that the Jews observed the mitzvah of eating matzah the night before. The night before the Yetzias Mitzrayim. When they brought the carbon Pesach, HaKadosh Baruch Hu told them that they should eat the carbon Pesach with matzah and mar. So they observed the mitzvah of matzah the night before the Exodus. So how could you say the significance of the matzah is in this, that they didn't have time for the dough to rise because they were chased out the next day, or the Shekhinah pulled them out the next day? What would the meaning have been of the matzah they ate the night before? And secondly, there seems to be a contradiction. That here, the matzah is understood to be a symbol of redemption. A symbol of the swiftness of the redemption. That the redemption was so swift that they didn't even have time to wait for the dough to rise. And yet we know that in the Haggadah itself, we mentioned before that the matzah is a symbol of the servitude. Halach ma'anya, the achalu avasana barad mitzrayim. That the matzah is the bread of affliction their forefathers ate in Egypt. And the Ramban explains in Parshas Re'eh that as avodim we were fed a very meager ration, and the matzah symbolizes that. So what is it? Is it a symbol of the swiftness of the liberation, or is it a symbol of the servitude? The Abarbanel explains in his commentary that it's really both. And there are two different mitzvahs of matzah. There's the mitzvah of eating matzah with the carbon Pesach. The Torah says, Al matzos umerim yochluhu, you should eat the carbon Pesach with matzah and mar. And there's the mitzvah of eating matzah, which is apart from the carbon Pesach. The mitzvah of eating matzah even when there is no carbon Pesach. And the Abarbanel says the two are fundamentally different. When the Beis HaMikdash stood, the Iker Zecher, the main remembrance of the liberation, was the carbon Pesach. it is the eating of the Korban Pesach which commemorated the liberation. As we said, it commemorates the miracle of the Jews being spared in the Makas Bechoros. The matzah and the maror, which is eaten with the Korban Pesach, provides the background. Al matzos u'marorim yochluhu, that after matzah and maror you eat the Korban Pesach. That matzah symbolizes the meager ration. The maror symbolizes the bitterness of servitude. The Korban Pesach is the symbol of liberation. The Gemara says that even when there is no Korban Pesach, there's a mitzvah of matzah. We learn from a different pasuk, Berav Tochlu Matzahs. The matzah b'zman hazeh is daraisa, even though there's no Korban Pesach. But when we eat matzah b'zman hazeh, it's transformed. It's different. That matzah, the matzah we eat when we eat it alone, is a symbol of the swiftness of the Geula. We don't have Korban Pesach to commemorate the liberation. So the commemoration of the liberation is through the vehicle of matzah. So the Bible understands that there's a fundamental difference between matzah that we eat with the Korban Pesach and matzah that we eat when we don't have a Korban Pesach. When we have a Korban Pesach, the Iker Zecher of the liberation is the Korban Pesach. So the matzah relates to the servitude. When we don't have a Korban Pesach, the Iker Zecher of the Chayvus of the liberation is the matzah, and it has a totally different significance. And therefore, the Rabbi Eliezer says that this is the question that our Haggadah is asking. Matzah zu she'anu oichlin al shulma. The matzah that we eat, why do we eat it? Of course, the matzah that was eaten with the Korban Pesach had a different significance. But what is the meaning of the matzah that we eat? The matzah that we eat is really a symbol of the swiftness of the liberation. It's an amazing thing. In other words, we have a mitzvah that we do sometimes with the Korban Pesach, and we do without the Korban Pesach. Says the Rabbi, no, the symbolism is totally different. When we have a Korban Pesach, it symbolizes, together with the maror, the bitterness of the servitude, and the Zeichel Lecheres is through the vehicle of Korban Pesach. Bizman hazeh, that we don't have Korban Pesach, the symbolism is transformed, and matzah becomes a symbol of Cheres. So just al derech hapilpul, I'd like to point out that this might address a very interesting question. The Torah brings a suffix from his brother, Rabbi Yechiel, whether koreich requires haseba or not. When you eat koreich, the sandwich of matzah and maror, do you have to recline or not? As we know, that reclining symbolizes cheres, freedom, luxury. So on the one hand, matzah, we recline from matzah. Maror, we don't recline. So what do you do when you eat a sandwich of matzah and maror? Do you recline or not? So the Rabbi Yechiel is Masuk. So the Beis Yosef says he doesn't understand what the suffix is. It's pashut that you should require haseba for korech. And this is how the Shulchan Aruch paskins. This is why he makes the following argument. If you look at the source of the Gemara says like this: Matzah boy haseba. Matzah requires haseba. Maror lo boy haseba. Maror doesn't require haseba. The Gemara never says you're not allowed to recline when you eat the maror. It says it doesn't require it. If you want to recline, you can recline. It's not required. But for the matzah, it's required. So therefore, if you're eating a sandwich of matzah and maror, so the matzah requires haseba. The maror, it makes no difference. It's optional. So of course, you should do haseba. And furthermore, says the Beis Yosef, the korech that we eat is zeichel lemigdash kehillos, commemorate how Hillel performed the mitzvah when the Beis Hamikdash stood. Now, when the Beis Hamikdash stood, Hillel did not eat matzah before. All he ate was korech. His matzah and maror was eaten as a sandwich, and matzah requires haseba. So of course, Hillel must have eaten it by haseba. So if we're trying to commemorate what Hillel did, we should do it as he did it by haseba. That's what the Beis Yosef says. Now, there could be the svar of the Rabbi Eliezer might not be that way. This, if the Gemara says matzah by haseba, according to the Rabbi Eliezer, is only matzah bizman hazeh. Bizman hazeh that we don't have a Korban Pesach, so the matzah is the symbol of liberation, the swiftness of liberation. So matzah requires haseba. But when we had a Korban Pesach, and the matzah and the maror were symbols of servitude, then it was only the carbon pesach that required haseba, but the matzah and maror didn't require haseba. And therefore, when Hillel made his seder, and as the Rambam says, even according to Hillel, he ate matzah and maror in a sandwich and then ate carbon pesach separately. He didn't eat the carbon pesach in the sandwich, the Rambam says. He ate a sandwich of matzah and maror and then ate the carbon pesach separately. So that matzah and maror were both symbols of avdus. Therefore, Hillel undoubtedly did not do haseba. He did haseba when he ate the carbon pesach. So therefore, if we do zeichel and mikdash kehillel, we'll do exactly as Hillel did, and we won't do haseba for the karech either. So the suffix of Rabbi Nechiel makes perfect sense. His suffix is this question itself, that Zman HaMikdash was the matzah also a zeichel lecheres, or perhaps, as the Rabbanel says, that Zman HaMikdash the matzah was only a zeichel le'avdus. Just mention two other interesting things about this paragraph about the matzah. The Sfas Emes says that this that it says that the dough didn't have time to ferment also can be understood on the figurative level. As we know that in the metaphor of Chazal, fermentation is a symbol for turning evil. And the Gemara in Rosh Hashanah talks about Kairesh, that there were two stages of his life. One stage of his life he was the Melech Kosher. Later on he was not so So the Gemara says, here it's Kaidem Shehechmitz, and here it's La'achar Shehechmitz. This is before he fermented, this is after he fermented. This fermentation is symbolic of turning evil, turning sour. The Gemara says in Masechtas Brachas that the Yetzer Hara is called the So'or Shebe'isa. It's the sour dough that causes the dough to ferment. That's the force that turns people bad. It's called So'or Shebe'isa. As we know, the Mekubalim tell us that the Jews were at risk. The Jews had descended to very, very, very low levels of depravity. So to speak, the Mem Tes Sharei Tumah, the 49 levels of impurity. If they'd gone one level deeper, there would have been no hope. They couldn't be redeemed. That's why the Geula had to be as swift as it was. That's lo hispik b'tzeikim shlavasena lahachmetz. The dough did not have time to ferment. In a figurative sense, it means that they did not turn totally sour, but HaKadosh Baruch Hu rather redeemed them before they hit rock bottom, and that's why they could be saved. That's lo hispik b'tzeikim shlavasena lahachmetz. So the dough, the literal dough not fermenting, is really symbolic of something else, which is the spiritual dough not fermenting. And that's the Sfas Emes says. And the Maharal points out another interesting thing, that the symbolism of fermentation versus non-fermentation, chametz versus matzah, is something else. He says this, that chametz is a process which takes place over time. In other words, the dough has to rise and ferment. You make dough, it isn't 1, 2, 3, even if you add yeast. You have to let it sit, it rises, and so on and so forth. Natural processes are compared to chimutz, because anything that happens naturally takes time. It takes time for the thing to unfold, for the thing to develop. So things that happen through natural causes are compared to the process of fermentation. Matzah, there's no process of fermentation, it doesn't ferment. And therefore, something which HaKadosh Baruch Hu does miraculously is compared to matzah. There's no process. When HaKadosh Baruch Hu decides to do something, it's done. Right? Hu Omar Vayehi. Right? He says the word, and it happens. There's no process, there's no development, there's no evolution. It just happens. Hashem wants it to be, it is. And therefore, the Yetzias Mitzrayim is compared to matzah as opposed to chametz. Because the Yetzias Mitzrayim was HaKadosh Baruch Hu b'chvodo v'atzmo. It's HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself, not through a malach, not through a saraf, not through natural causes. It's HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself was the payel that affected the liberation, and therefore it's compared to matzah as opposed to chametz, because it isn't a process which unfolds and develops, it's something which is abrupt. Now I'd like to point out that even in this, it's an amazing thing. Rashi in Chumash tells us that the distance between Ramses and Sukkos is really 120 mil. It's a long journey. And it says in Rashi that the Jews did it in the blink of an eye. they got from there to here in no time at all. And the proof of that is the fact that the dough still had not fermented when they got to Sukkos. Now, if you make dough back in Ramses, and then you go on a 120-kilometer trip, you would expect that you'd have chametz when it's all over. But it didn't, because miraculously they went from Ramses to Sukkos in the blink of an eye, and therefore the dough was still matzah, not chametz, when they arrived there, and therefore they could bake it as matzah. And that symbolizes, of course, this idea that something HaKadosh Baruch Hu does is abrupt, it's sudden, there's no delay, there's no development. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants the Jews to leave Mitzrayim, and the Yetzias Mitzrayim really is that first journey from Ramses to Sukkos. It's Keharafayim, it's in the blink of an eye. It's not something natural, which is a process. Mara is the Mara that we eat al shum mo. So this is very straightforward. Al shum shemeru mitzvah mischaya v'sein Mitzrayim. It's because the Egyptians embittered our lives in Mitzrayim, as it says, "Vayumaru es chayim b'avoda kasha." The Egyptians embittered our lives with difficult work, v'chayim v'veinim, mortar and bricks, v'chol avoda b'sada, field work, eitz kol avodasim asher ovdu hem b'farach. All the work that they made the Jews do was backbreaking. The question is that why do we need to have two symbols of the servitude? You remember, as the Rabbi explained, that Bisman we had the Korban Pesach, and the Korban Pesach was the Iker Zecher Lechevus. Both the matzah and the maror symbolize the servitude. Why do we need two symbols? Why the matzah and the maror? And the Rabbi addresses that, and he says very beautifully. He says that the matzah symbolizes the objective difficulties. They were given a meager ration, and there was nothing to eat. Matzah is very difficult to digest. They suffered. The maror symbolizes the emotional side of it, the bitterness of it. Because we know that when a person goes through a difficult time, so there are objectively difficult things. You know, working is very hard in the hot sun in Egypt, and there's a taskmaster with a whip. Those things are very, very difficult. But there's also the emotional side of it. It's how you feel, your self-esteem, and the crushing of your spirit and your ambitions. That's something else. And therefore, it's the matzah and the maror. The matzah symbolizes the objective suffering, the objective deprivation. The maror symbolizes the emotional side of it, the mariras, the bitterness of it. And that's why we have the two symbols of the affliction. In every generation, a person has to see himself as if he left Mitzrayim. Shneimar, as it says, you shall tell your son on that day, this is for what Hashem did to me when I left Mitzrayim. It's known that the Rambam adds a word to this, that a person has to see himself as he left Mitzrayim ata, now. Now, this obligation in every generation to see oneself as if he left Mitzrayim doesn't mean I should see myself as one who left Mitzrayim a year ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. It means that on the night of the Seder, I should see myself as if I left Mitzrayim now. Now, how would you see that from the pasuk of Bavur Zeh Asa Hashem Li? Maybe Bavur Zeh Asa Hashem Li means I do the mitzvahs for what God did to me, but not necessarily did it now. Maybe He did it a long time ago. The answer seems to be as follows. Now, the Ramban in Chumash on this pasuk of Bavur Zeh Asa Hashem Li has three pshatim. That's what the meaning of the pasuk is. But one of the interpretations is this. I'm telling my children, why do I do the mitzvahs? Ba'avur zeh, because of this, that Hashem did for me when He took me out of Mitzrayim. So why is what Hashem did for me called this? Ba'avur zeh, because of this. This implies there is something which is current, something which is happening now. It's not ancient history. Ba'avur zeh, I'm doing this because of this that I can point to. Something is happening now. So that implies not just that I was taken out of Mitzrayim, but that it's happening actually this very minute. And that's how the Rambam understands from the pasuk, that b'chol dar v'dar, you have to see yourself as if you left Mitzrayim, not 10 years ago, not 20 years ago, but now. Now it continues. Lo es aveseinu bilvad goal HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's not just our forefathers that were redeemed. Ela af osanu goal imohem. We were redeemed with them. Shenemar, as it says, v'osanu hotzi misham. God took us out. Laman havi osanu, to bring us. Los eslanu, to give us. Es ha'aretz asher nishba lo b'seinu, the land that He swore to our forefathers. Now, anybody who's sensitive to the way Chazal will string together their sentences realizes that we must be talking about two different halachas over here. Because first we make a statement, a proposition, b'chol dor v'dor, and to that we bring a supporting pasuk. We learn that from the pasuk of v'yigav l'bincha. Then we make a second proposition, lo asavaseinu bolvad, and we bring another pasuk as a proof to that, a pasuk of v'osanu hotzi misham. So if each proposition requires its own supporting pasuk, we're obviously talking about two different statements. There's the b'chol dor v'dor chayav aron lirus esatzim kiliyat mitzrayim, and there's a separate statement, v'osanu hotzi misham, and each of these is different, and each requires its own supporting verse. How do we understand it? I think the answer is this. The Ramban tells us that the reason the Torah places such a great emphasis on the Yetzias Mitzrayim is because it is the confirmation of our most fundamental theological beliefs about God. That God exists, that God is all-knowing, that God is omnipotent, that God cares about us, in the sense that the Makkos were foretold to Moshe Rabbeinu. It's the confirmation of the idea of Nevuah. The stories of Yetzias Mitzrayim confirm our most basic beliefs about the Ribono Shel Olam. They're the yesod, they're the foundation of our emunah. So, even if we are not the beneficiaries of the Yetzias Mitzrayim, and one can make a very strong case that we're not, because after all said and done, there's been a lot of history since the Yetzias Mitzrayim. There have been many Goliaths and many persecutions, yet the Yetzias Mitzrayim still serves as the basis of our emunah, the basis of our faith. And therefore it's very important that we retell it and recount it, and that it be vivid and real. And that's the first statement, that in every generation a person has to see himself as if he is there now. Not because he's necessarily the beneficiary of the Yetzias Mitzrayim. He may be in a dungeon somewhere. He may be very much enslaved. But nevertheless, in as much as this is the yesod of the emunah, a person must see himself as if he is there now, meaning that it shouldn't be a memory, it should be something which is vivid and clear, something which is before his very eyes at this moment. And that's right from the pasuk, as we said, Ba'avur zeh also Hashem li. The mitzvahs I observe is because of this thing which is right now happening, that Hashem did for me. That's the idea of using the power of imagination. And we have to use our imaginations. To imagine the beatings and the lashing of the whip and witnessing the Makkos and the Kriyas Yamsuf, to establish our faith. But there's something else we have to know, that it's not just a question of faith. The truth is that we really are the beneficiaries of Yetzias Mitzrayim. Because the gift of Eretz Yisrael was given to us as part of that covenant, the Bris Bein HaBesarim. It was a deal. We'll go through the Golos Mitzrayim, be rewarded with Eretz Yisrael, and therefore the fact that we possess Eretz Yisrael, and for us perhaps that is even more significant than it was for many earlier generations. It certainly will become even more significant when Mashiach comes. But that also was a consequence of the Yetzias Mitzrayim. V'osanu hotzi misham, that God took us out, l'man havi osanu, to bring us, to give us the land that was foretold to our forefathers. And therefore there's a second idea. Lo es avosenu b'vad goal HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It isn't just our forefathers that were redeemed. Af osanu goal imohem. We were also redeemed. And the idea behind that is this. We tend to think that certain things are done, and they may have consequences that are unattended that only are revealed generations later. But certainly the person who did them had no intention for those consequences. A person plants a tree, and the tree bears fruit, so the fact that 100 years from now, if someone eats those fruit, was certainly unintended by the person who planted the tree. In the case of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, there's no such thing as an unintended consequence. When HaKadosh Baruch Hu makes a decision, when HaKadosh Baruch Hu does something, he knows exactly what is going to follow from that act, ad sof kol hadoros. And therefore, when HaKadosh Baruch Hu took the Jews out of Mitzrayim, it's not that he took these Jews out of Mitzrayim and unintentionally it resulted that their great-great-great-grandchildren would have the gift of Eretz Yisrael. Everything was ba b'cheshbon. Everything was calculated. Everything was foreseen. And therefore, when HaKadosh Baruch Hu took the Jews out of Mitzrayim, he saw us here, and it's Osana Hotzi Misham. He took us out. Lo Asab was saying about HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It wasn't that HaKadosh Baruch Hu redeemed our forefathers and we are the unintended beneficiaries of that liberation. Af Osana Go'ali Mayim. HaKadosh Baruch Hu certainly had all of us in mind, and perhaps it's really our actions that justify the Gul in the first place. HaKadosh Baruch Hu might not have done it so many years ago had he not foreseen the ways that would impact and affect us. And that's a totally separate idea. The Ba'avur Za'asa Hashem Li is an exercise in imagination. Because we have to use our power of imagination to envision ourselves there so that the stories of the Yetzias Mitzrayim will serve as a basis for our Emunah as well. The V'osana Hotzi Misham is a reality that we are also the beneficiaries of the Yetzias Mitzrayim, and therefore we have to be embedded. As we say in the beginning of the Haggadah, HaKadosh Baruch Hu HaKadosh Baruch Hu wouldn't have taken out our forefathers. We'd still be there. So therefore, we are the actual beneficiaries of the Gula, and that's the second statement of Allah.